Thank you for joining us today on Matters of Substance. Today, it's Carly here along with Caitlin. Hello, Caitlin.
Good morning.
Good morning. So Caitlin and I are speaking with a very special guest, Aubree Adams. She is living in Colorado. She is a former host mom for Youth in Recovery and the director of Every Brain Matters. Aubree has worked on policy change surrounding marijuana and is here to kind of share what she knows about the impact of marijuana legalization and some of the educational aspects of what she does. So, Aubree, could you just kind of introduce yourself a bit and share why you're here? Why you have a passion for this area of your expertise and why you're speaking out?
Well, thank you for having me, Carly and Caitlin. I appreciate you inviting me to speak about my story and my passion. I did live through the legalization of marijuana in Colorado. I did not think it would affect my family, but it ended up destroying my family. I have two family members that were harmed tremendously, that became addicted and hearing voices and irrational, paranoid. And at the time, I did not know what psychosis was, but when this was all happening, I had to educate myself and go, can marijuana do this? And yes, absolutely. Marijuana causes psychosis, episodes of psychosis, and has the highest conversion rate to schizophrenia, a 5-fold increase. So marijuana use was minimized with my son, and finding treatment was impossible. So I volunteered my family for crisis intervention with the Department of Social Services because I had a friend who was a social worker, and she said, as a taxpayer, that you have that right. And I had no clue that those kind of services were available. During that period of time, we had a case open with DSS. We did learn we did get some good services, but my son's marijuana use was minimized. And unfortunately, he would get better and then he'd go back into it. And then he progressed even onto meth and heroin for a short period of time. You know, I just am the mom that will not, I just wanted to do everything I could to get in the way of my son destroying himself. And I soon realized I was in a battle for his life, and I was living in a community that did not support his health. And so I got really clear on what I could control and what I couldn't control. And through opportunities, networking, and the grace of God, and it's a long story, after his fourth hospitalization, I found a community in Houston, Texas, recovery community. So I tell everybody I'm from ground zero of the marijuana expansion movement, and I took my kids to ground zero of the youth recovery movement in Houston, Texas, and I finished raising them there. And to me and my story and the survival of my children, that was a key part of my story. I'm not saying that's a option for everybody or a cure for everybody, and I'm not saying there's a cure, but it was very helpful. And to me, it was life-saving for both my children and for me, because I was losing my own health and my own sanity through this process too, and I wasn't even the one using marijuana. So that's to kind of give you a little summary of my story. And then through getting educated about marijuana and how terrible this policy of legalization is, I developed a community called Every Brain Matters, and we are a community of advocacy and support in science, and we are just growing tremendously. And through that, we have helped develop Maranon, which is like Al-Anon for alcoholism or substance use disorder, but we have specialized Maranon now. It was already in existence, and the person who developed it handed the reins over to us and allowed us to develop it. And that is growing tremendously too, because marijuana is very harmful and more dangerous than ever before and more accessible than ever before with these drug promotional policies.
So I haven't heard of the Maranon before, but how do people get connected if their family members, I'm assuming this is similar to Al-Anon, like you just mentioned, where if you're a family member of somebody struggling with substance use, you can go to these meetings and find support and kind of talk through your experiences as a supportive person to somebody that's struggling. And so I'm assuming this is similar in that concept. It just focuses on on marijuana use
That
specifically.
that's correct. I mean, yeah, so you can go to maranon.com to get more information. It's MAR-ANON.com. And there's a meeting tab. You can see all our meetings. I think we're up to 6 weekly meetings, and it's all online. We do have a member who's starting an in-person meeting in Idaho. I will be starting an in-person meeting here in Pueblo, Colorado. And yeah, so, and I run my group, I run on every Saturday morning for dual diagnosis. So cannabis use disorder or addiction to marijuana, and or cannabis induced psychosis, and or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So those are the 3 diagnoses that so many families are being harmed with, and some of these families are not getting their children back. And unfortunately, and the tides are turning, but in other rooms of recovery, there's a lot of misinformation and just lack of education. So when a family member might go to an Al-Anon meeting, they're like, what? No, we didn't even know marijuana was addictive. What do you mean it causes psychosis? And what is this severe vomiting syndrome you're talking about? And it's kind of wearing down the families and the parents to try to explain that, yes, marijuana is addictive and it's really harming my child. And this is very serious. So now they have a space they can come into with a group, a community that understands, we get it. We're living the same experiences. Let's work together and try to heal and grow and learn from this and spread it to others. So we're really proud of the work we've all done.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
And I'm not super familiar with the last diagnosis that you mentioned. Could you explain it a bit?
Sure. It's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So breaking it down, cannabinoid are the chemicals in the marijuana plant. So that can be THC, CBD, or the other hundreds that are there, but those are the 2 main chemicals. And then hyperemesis means, hyper means excessive, emesis means vomiting. And then it's a syndrome. So it's a group of symptoms. There's not like a direct diagnosis for it. It's diagnosed through symptoms. And it was a condition that was founded in 2004 that was kind of rare at the time. But since legalization, it's the main reason why people seek medical services in the ER, because they are, what it is a toxic level of marijuana in your system. So just like if you would drink a bunch of alcohol, you would vomit. This is the same thing, but it's worse. And I would not advocate for alcohol use, but when you vomit from alcohol toxicity, you have it out of your system within a few hours because it's a water-soluble substance. Cannabinoids, or CBD and THC, are fat soluble drugs, substance chemicals. And so they adhere to receptor sites in our bodies and the endocannabinoid system, and they block that system up. It's a regulatory system in our body. And we get to toxic levels in our body, and our body just wants to get rid of it. But it's very hard because they're stuck in those receptor sites. They adhere to the fat in our body. Unfortunately, our fattiest organ is our brain. And so these people can become very, very sick. Some of the symptoms are what they call scromiting, which is screaming while vomiting. They have severe abdominal pain. They cannot keep fluids down and food down, and they lose an excessive amount of weight. And unfortunately, people are dying from this syndrome. The good news is it's curable, totally 100% curable, but you have to stop all marijuana use, including CBD. it's hard when you're addicted, right? And it's hard when there's a lot of misinformation that marijuana helps with nausea and vomiting, right? That's what most people think. But now that marijuana is more potent, it's more toxic. It was toxic before, but it's tremendously toxic now. So there are people that are literally dying from marijuana from just this syndrome alone. It's devastating. And people who experience this syndrome can be hospitalized. I know a young man who was hospitalized, I want to say 30 times. He was in and out of rehab. And most rehab facilities would not accept him because he was addicted to marijuana. But I think, they recognize that, finally he got to the point and he told his parents, I don't want to die. But, I don't want to die. I need help. I need to be inpatient to detox off this because I can't do it on my own. And he's thriving now. I'm really proud of that. But I unfortunately know 2 parents that don't have their children from this. And it is devastating. So I know it's something that most people have never heard about. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell you about it. And the short term is CHS. So you don't have to remember cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And you can go to the Maranon site and go under the resource tab. And we have a brochure that explains just simply what it is, how to get help. And then the same on Every Brain Matters. On the very front page of the website, if you just scroll down, it says, what is CHS or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome? And it'll give you that information.
I think it's so important that you have all of this information because I feel like a lot of parents, they just are, and it's not their fault, but they just don't have any idea what their child, sometimes they're just completely unaware of what their child might be doing or what the effects are, because I know on Smart Approaches to Marijuana, one of the big things that is said is that, today's marijuana is not like what was being smoked, back in the day or in the 80s or the 90s or the 70s. So I think it has just changed so much. And I've heard so many horror stories about marijuana use and its effects long-term and short-term, and just the potency and the toxicity of it now. So I appreciate you sharing all of that.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And, I always say today's marijuana is a hard, dangerous drug. It is not a soft drug. And the fact that the youth rates and even in adults is just skyrocketing. We are paying a heavy price for this. I mean, during the biggest drug crisis in America, we're passing drug promotional policies that are even fueling the opioid crisis. And we have proof of that too. The science shows that, one of the statistics, I can't talk, that I talk about is in Science Direct. It says the number one predictor for adult opioid use disorder is just the initiation of marijuana use under the age of 18. Now, why? And so we really have got to pick our public health and safety over a few people getting rich, because the costs just outweigh any tax revenue that comes in with this. And there's just a few people getting rich while we pay the price. That's why I'm so passionate on this issue. We've got to stop the marijuana expansion.
So you said that you're in Colorado when the legalization occurs. So you were at ground zero. Can you kind of shed some light on what that looked like? And if like maybe what some of the hopes were with the legalization, and then what we've seen now, that most things, at least that I'm aware of, have not gone the way the expectation was. Can you kind of shed a little light on all of that?
Sure. Well, prior to legalization, I was never exposed to marijuana. My family and I were never exposed to marijuana smell or smoke or advertisements here in Pueblo, Colorado. It wasn't even a topic of conversation. We had some drug prevention. I was like my kid's Cub Scout leader, and we had a little drug prevention there. And I think they got some in school, but that's the only time we ever spoke about it. But January 2014, this whole town flipped upside down. They had a huge marijuana party out in the county, and we had people just showing up that didn't have resources, that didn't have jobs, that had children with them. And our community was shocked. We're a small community. In the whole community, the whole county is about 160,000 people. We take pride in what we do. We take care of the underprivileged here. We do fundraisers. Like my kids' school, we did a empty bowls charity event where we would raise like 10,000 in one day and fill up our food banks for the poor and all that. So then our community was just overloaded with, what do? We have all these people here. They have no resources. They have children with them. And our social services they were just flipped upside down. So the other thing that happened too is we had criminal organizations from all over the world move into our neighborhoods. And that was just so shocking and so scary. Never before had we had that problem. It progressed. There were shootings just in my neighborhood alone. They killed a man right by my parents' garage, 3 blocks away from my home, over a marijuana transaction. So when they legalized and said you can grow marijuana in your home, they turned every home in the state of Colorado into a potential drug house. And criminal organizations, mom and pop organizations, criminal organizations, and big, large criminal organizations related to cartels took full advantage of that. They came and they started buying up property and homes and renting places and just turning them into greenhouses and growing and selling as much marijuana as they could. They trafficked poor people from all over the world here, especially from Cuba and China, but we had them from Argentina and Russia. And we're just this kind of sleepy old community, kind of looks like the Wild West out here. In town, we did have gang problems prior to legalizations, but the gangs are like, this is great. We can totally make so much more money now. And they got involved in it. And I had a gang shooting in front of my house. They were shooting at each other, driving down my street. Their cars crashed in front in my neighbor's lawn. I mean, never before did we ever have these problems before. Just within a block of me, I had 2 illegal marijuana grow houses. One was directly across from me in the alley. And then my other neighbors that were over there, at the time, they had 3 small children, and they couldn't even allow their children to play in the backyard because of these illegal grow houses. Just not only the illegal activity of them selling marijuana out the back door and driving right by our houses, all these people to pick up and transport this marijuana, but the smell and the smoke coming into our properties and into our homes was just awful. People think that these policies aren't going to change your way of life. They're very mistaken. Our community ended up where I couldn't even go to the movie theater without being exposed to marijuana. I remember on my son's 14th birthday, I took him up to Denver, up to Elitch's, or like the Six Flags amusement park. Walking out from there, they were doing bong hits in the parking lot, and the smoke just came all over us. And I was like, kids, cover your nose and mouth, Those are just, I mean, I could talk forever about being exposed to marijuana. In my son's 8th grade celebration from his school, which was a K through 8th charter school here in Pueblo, somebody had marijuana on them. Somebody had used marijuana, and the whole gym and hallway stunk of marijuana during the celebration. I mean, it just ruined it. And the teachers don't know what to do because they're like, does somebody have it on them? Is it legal? Who is it? Is it a parent? Is it a child? If it's a parent and they tell the parent to leave, are they going to ruin that child's evening? I mean, it's completely out of control, and it permeates every aspect of your life, to the point where we did not walk around my neighborhood anymore, to the point where I didn't want to go out to social gatherings. One more thing is there was a summer, I ended up moving to Houston, Texas to finish raising my children. But I was here. It was the summer of 2019, visiting my parents, and their neighbors just right over here were growing marijuana in their backyard. And you could see it from right under the fence. My kids could reach over the fence and grab the marijuana. Now, that is illegal in our county. You're not supposed to have outside grows, but there's not enough law enforcement to enforce these policies. And, I would be in my mom's kitchen doing dishes, and then just the smell of marijuana inside the home. It's awful. You can't get away from it. And because of my son's psychotic episodes from this drug, I'm traumatized just from the smell of it, just from the look of it. My younger son, especially too. And that's why it was important for him to get into recovery. So I'm sorry I'm talking so long, but I could talk forever. But when they say drug addiction is a family disease, it is a family disease, and it affects the non-users in the family, and it affects the community. So I'm definitely living proof of that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all of this information, and don't ever feel guilty about speaking. That's why we have you here. So we appreciate that you are sharing that. Yeah, so just kind of like as I'm processing everything you're saying, I'm thinking about, we're in Indiana, so we aren't a legalized state. There's no legalization at all of any degree, whether it be medical or recreational. And these are just the things that I haven't really thought about, right? I've thought about if legalization were to happen, walking outside, how, I've been to like Michigan, I've been to Las Vegas, I've walked around out there since legalization, and typically, I smell marijuana at least once when I'm out walking around, but I didn't think about the impact of it in like your neighborhood kind of thing, not just like while you're out in a city or something. And that's a scary thing to think about, having a family and you're just trying to take a walk and you can't even do that without being affronted by, somebody else making that choice. And I guess if it's legal, that's their choice to make, but it's still impacting you, and that's not fair or right.
Yeah, there's a lot of self-entitlement with the people that are using marijuana. I'm not saying all of them, but it's their rights are more important than the non-users' rights at this point in our country. And there's no accountability for it. So it's very unfortunate. I never thought our country would get to this point. I loved living in Colorado, but it's even going on hikes now, you're exposed to it. I was just talking to another drug preventionist, and there's a really good hike called the Incline here. You got to be in really good shape to go up it. But she said she got all the way up to the top of the incline, and they were doing bong hits at the top. You just want to go out and you just want to enjoy beautiful Colorado. And I started a YouTube channel just under my name years ago to start exposing some of this. And, at the time it was really, it's hard to speak out now on it. Back then it was like really hard. So some of the videos, I don't show the faces, but I have testimonies from a high school teachers. I have testimonies that talk about these kids, little elementary school kids showing up to school dirty and hungry and thirsty because their parents are choosing to use the water to water the marijuana plants instead of giving it to the kids. And just horrific stories like that. And I just went to a marijuana conference in Denver yesterday. And one of the doctors that has been speaking out here in Pueblo, Dr. Brad Roberts, was describing cases of marijuana psychosis from adults, not just children, and how there's no place to get these people help. And he talked about a 1-year-old baby coming in comatose, only testing positive for marijuana. They couldn't find anything else wrong with the child because they thought maybe infection or something like that. Nothing. The child was testing positive for marijuana, comatose. There was no help. They were referred to CPS, but the child went back home with those parents, and then the child ended up coming back again the next week too. And now the child's back and home with the parents. Now, hopefully somebody can educate the parents and be like, you can't give your baby marijuana. But those are just all the little things that we're not putting our health and safety first. We're not putting our children first. I'm not saying that baby should be taken from the parents, but I'm saying there should be some kind of intervention where they need some kind of accountability for what they're doing to their kid, as long as they're educated that this is what's happening. Maybe they're believing the industry that this is so safe and natural and harmless, that it's medicine, and they should be giving it to everybody, because that is messages that they do say. So it's a tragedy what's happening here.
Sounds like it. I mean, and like you were saying earlier, the entitlement, the rights of marijuana users, I don't know, to me it just sounds completely lawless and just out of control. And I don't know, I'm completely disturbed by this, and I'm just really hoping that it doesn't, there are a lot of people here in Indiana who think that marijuana will become legalized because it's, not because, but just because everyone else is doing it. And it's like, that's what I don't understand about this country, is why, why people can't make their own informed decisions. They just have to jump on these bandwagons. And it's very disturbing. And, I don't know.
You're absolutely right. And it's like, if one person's going to jump off the cliff, the next person shouldn't. I mean, for Indiana, you have the facts, you have the science. It's an epic failure. And so, as common sense folks in Indiana, the legislators, I mean, there is no reason to legalize marijuana and go down with this ship like other states are. Now, here in Colorado, we've even passed a bill to push back on the industry. And it was like getting an act of God to do that. But 50 organizations, Democrats and Republicans, supported this bill. You never hear of Democrats and Republicans working together. Well, they did on the pushback against the marijuana industry, because all Democrats and Republicans' families are being harmed, and they know how out of control this is. So the elected officials that support this predatory addiction for profit industry, they need to be called out. They need to be held accountable. They need to get the heck out of office and quit destroying our families.
What are some of the policies that you would encourage states to consider if marijuana is a topic that's on their legislature? What are some of the things that need to be implemented if it gets passed?
Well, number one, the best drug prevention Indiana can do is not legalize, period. And that needs to be the message. If you believe in drug prevention and you don't want the drug crisis to expand, don't legalize marijuana. Don't use these excuses of enabling and it's inevitable. I mean, that's propaganda. That's pro-pot propaganda that's been fueled in by the media and normalized by the media. And like, Caitlin was saying, we're smarter than this, and we can do better than this, and you should. Now, if you do unfortunately pass, which I don't think you will. I think the tides are turning. Just in the past couple of weeks, we have seen tremendous, because they're realizing that the violence, these mass shootings, are connected with marijuana psychosis. And but if it were to pass, I would get a potency cap right away. I would not do any edibles whatsoever. They're so dangerous. No vaping whatsoever. And you got to have warning labels. I mean, here we push back on cigarettes all these years, and now, I mean, they want to smoke marijuana, they want to smoke hemp. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just to get a few people rich. So, I hope that Indiana would never fall to this, but those are three things I would look at: no edibles, potency cap, anything that has 10% more of THC in it or higher, it's considered high potency marijuana. So I would cap it at least at 5 or 10% or even lower. And then no edibles and no vapes, because the vapes provide even if it's a low concentration of THC, it provides a very fast hit, fast delivery system to the brain. And I call it a chemical assault to the brain. And to me, the vapes look like bullets just aimed right at our children. And that is what's causing severe addiction and severe mental illness, and why these young men, it's so sad. It's so sad what's happening. These young men are becoming so psychotic, losing who they are, and then thinking they need to go in and shoot up a school or go to a parade and shoot people. They're so paranoid. So anybody using marijuana that's out there, even like very pro marijuana people, because I go on pro marijuana podcasts because they need to hear this too. If you're feeling a little bit paranoid after using marijuana, that's a precursor that psychosis is coming. You need to quit right away. And no, even if you quit, it's staying in your body. You can still become psychotic and have a psychotic episode. So you need to quit, and you need to get yourself help. You need eyes on you. You need professionals involved, professionals that understand the harms of marijuana and that it does cause psychosis, not the people out there that are just wishy-washy. I mean, it's terrible, some of the misinformation, even from the medical community. But just so you know, that is a precursor. So don't ever smoke again, and try to get as much help as you can if you're addicted to get off of it.
I want to kind of draw back to, you mentioned the tobacco industry, and that's one of the things that I find really interesting about some of the states legalizing, because we've seen this model before. We know how badly it ends. I mean, it's the tobacco model, right? I mean, we know that when tobacco came on the scene, it was treated like it was no big deal and that it was not harmful for you. And it's the same messaging we're getting. And so it's kind of like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Well, and it's also like with alcohol, like, yes, it's illegal. We understand that, but all it takes is a little tiny bit of research to know. And speaking from someone who is in recovery, alcohol is just as bad as any other illicit drug. It's just that it's illegal, but it causes all of the same crime, injuries, deaths, mental illness, just the effects that it has on our bodies and our brains. Alcoholics are very sick, can be very sick people because, but because it's illegal, all you have to do is look at that. Alcohol causes, there are so many issues that happen as a result of alcohol. It's like the same thing.
Yeah, it's like we have drug biases, right? We just have all these drug biases. It's like and I don't even know why in like our terminology, we always say drugs and alcohol, like alcohol is some kind of different, alcohol is a drug. And so, we need to decrease that stigma, that bias, and know that every drug has potential harm. Some just might get you faster to those harms than others. And marijuana used to be one of those that didn't necessarily get you to that harm faster, but not anymore. Legal marijuana is more dangerous and more life-threatening than ever before. And, comparing alcohol to marijuana, and I would never, ever advocate for alcohol use. You can't become psychotic from one drink of alcohol. You can become psychotic from one swallow of THC. So that's a huge difference, though I would never advocate for alcohol. And the addiction rate too. Alcohol's addiction rate, which in itself is devastating, is about 15% rate. Marijuana is at 30%. Opioids, 24%. So, we obviously are harming, we're fueling the alcohol epidemic, we're fueling the opioid epidemic, the nicotine I mean, like you talked about, we worked so hard to get a reins on the tobacco industry. Now they've legalized all these nicotine vapes. I mean, it's like we just wiped out decades of prevention work. It's good to see the government is pushing back on that. So that's a good step in the right direction. But yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could continue to push back on alcohol and tobacco instead of adding fuel to the fire of our drug epidemic?
I think back to my first time sitting in a conference with Smart Approaches to Marijuana. which is like one of my very favorite organizations that we always promote here. And I remember them talking about how when legalization occurred in Colorado, you couldn't decipher between what was like not THC items and what was THC items. And then also the thing that really struck me was just the potency level of the THC in the items that are being created. You know, it's astronomically high, 90, sometimes they're 95, 98% THC, and that's like so incredibly dangerous. I don't understand how conceptually that's being legalized or saying it's okay. I mean, we can just reason out that that's not safe.
Absolutely. And by the way, Every Brain Matters is a project of Smart Approach to Marijuana. So we're the same family, and we're very excited to work with Kevin Sabet. And we have just developed another arm of SAM called the Parents Action Network. So go to everybrainmatters.org, hit the join button, and you'll be part of that network, because we're the main organization that's gathering these families together, and we're raising our voices. And you're so right about the potency. You know, my son, after his second acute psychiatric hospitalization, I was like, you know, what's going on? What's happening here? He was very suicidal, had attempted, survived, thank God. And he said, Mom, I was doing dabs. And I was like, what is a dab? And I used other language during that. He said, Mom, it's really strong marijuana. It's like crack weed. That's what he called it. And that was back in 2015. And that's why I was like, what is a dab? And I had to research it. It's very concentrated THC. They call it wax, shatter, butter, crumble. And they mass produce it. They call it medicine. They call it harmless. And I got mad. And as you can tell with my passion, you know, I'm still mad, but I'm trying to be proactive with this education. But, you know, I'm in touch with thousands of families harmed, you know, by these drugs and by marijuana. And I'm horrified of that it's continuing to expand instead of being pushed back on. But there's the tides are turning. I can see it just in the past couple of weeks. So there's a lot of hope for Indiana.
That makes me so happy to hear, because, you know, so often, like you said, you hear that propaganda kind of stuff where it's like, oh, it's going to happen. And we've worked with not a legislator, but somebody who's very involved down in Indianapolis, who speaks about alcohol. And she was sharing with us that she thought there was probably going to be some good resistance for Indiana legalizing. And so that was like a year ago or so. So it's like, yay, I'm glad that we are looking at this from a smart perspective and hopefully making the right decision for our communities. Because I mean, certainly we don't want to see what happened in your community when legalization occurred, you know, happen with us. And here, where we're stationed out with podcasts, we're in Northwest Indiana. So we have a little bit of that, like, we're kind of like a weird mixture. We have some Chicago influence, but we're also kind of rural. So like, it just depends on where you land. And so certainly we would be, I think, a pretty big risk for seeing some of that violence increase.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, you know, I can tell you and your viewers that we've killed marijuana legalization bill with just a few of us throughout the country many, many times. We held it off for 5 years in Vermont. So all you need to do is call a couple of us parents, about 3 doctors in, they hear the stories. It just kills the bill. And as long as your politicians aren't corrupt. Now, if they're corrupt and they're bought into, then it doesn't matter what we say. And I have been in hearings like that where I'm pouring my hearts out. I hear other people pouring their hearts out, and they still pass it. And during those times, we feel like they just spit in our face, you know, like they don't care. You know, it's too late for many of our families. It's too late. Many families have lost their kids to suicide. They're lost in addiction. But we are trying to prevent this to happen to other families. So when they do that and they say, no, we're still going to pass, it's like, the condolences to that community, and then, we just try to arm them up, so that even though it's passed, there's still things you can do to push back on the industry. So don't give up that hope in Indiana, and fight as hard as you can. Hold that line as hard as you can, because your communities are worth it. Your state's worth it. Your public health and safety is worth it.
You have such I can feel the passion just radiate from you when you speak about this, and that's so important. And it's good to know that there's a resource there. So anybody, because we are a nationally broadcasted podcast, we stream, so anybody can listen from anywhere. So certainly if you're hearing this, and you have concerns about your state legalizing, please reach out. On Every Brain Matters, that would be an appropriate way to connect, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, connect there and get Aubree connected with you and your officials, and find out how you guys can get them brought in to be heard, because that's what we need. We need people who have passion and who have, unfortunately, a sad story to share, but those stories impact decision making. And so we appreciate that you're willing to share that and advocate for the communities that you aren't even a part of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll keep doing it till I can't do it no more.
Wonderful. So I know that we have kind of talked about a lot of different things today. And I don't want to, we are going to be coming to an end here pretty soon. So I just want to make sure that there's nothing that we feel we have left out. Is there anything that you think we should cover that our listeners need to hear before we come to a close in about 10 minutes?
Yes. The Delta 8 THCs, they're probably in your communities already. I'm not sure, but through the Farm Bill of 2018, hemp was legalized, which legalized CBD. So now the drug entrepreneurs are taking CBD and they're converting it to different variants of THC. So those variants are, the Delta 9 THC is what's in the cannabis or the marijuana plant. So they're taking CBD and they're converting it to Delta 8 THC, Delta 10 THC, Delta 12 THC, THCO, and all these different variants. There's even one called HHP, or there's another one that we were talking about in the conference yesterday. These products are so harmful and dangerous, and they're being sold in gas stations and dollar stores and smoke shops across America. They're putting them into copycat candies. And so parents, families need to be aware of this. It's very deceptive packaging. They have them in vapes. So parents beware. Really be informed about what's going on. I unfortunately know 2 families that have lost their children to Delta 8, had psychotic breaks, and ended up dying by suicide. So that is something that's not talked about, and we need to raise awareness with that too. So thank you for asking me that question.
And I was sharing yesterday, we had Corrine on.
Yeah.
I think you guys know each other.
Oh yeah, yes, my good friend.
And we had briefly talked about Delta 8, and she recommended that we bring it up with you. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I had forgotten that she recommended that. And I was sharing with her yesterday that I recently was driving by a smoke shop in one of our communities, and I saw like the sign advertised, "We have Delta 8," and I was like, "What's that?" It was just kind of like, I didn't have a clue, first of all, what it was. And second of all, I was like, well, it's strange that they're advertising it. It must be like kind of the new thing, right? So like, I want to know more, because, as a prevention person, usually when something gets advertised, you need to start keeping it on your radar, right? Because then, it's coming up and you got to start thinking about how to prevent. And so I just wasn't very familiar with it at all. And I still feel very unfamiliar. And so I'm just glad that you brought it up and were able to educate a little bit. My understanding is that it can have effects to impair people. That's correct, right?
Absolutely. It's addictive. It can impair. They call the Delta 8 a little bit less potent than the Delta 9. It doesn't matter, because THC is a fat soluble substance. So everybody's threshold is different. It's going to no matter how much you consume, it's going to accumulate in your body. So you don't know what threshold where you're going to get at toxic levels, at levels where you're going to have a psychotic break, or a level where your brain becomes addicted. So very dangerous products out there. So I would recommend to the state of Indiana to get those outlawed, get those off the shelves, and maybe think about getting a policy passed to prevent marijuana legalization from coming to your state. So as be proactive with that and get some boundaries up right now that they can't pass policies like that. Because
Yeah,
really the states don't have the resources to manage and to regulate drugs. That's more of a federal issue. It's not a states' rights issue, because when one state does this kind of drug policies, it affects the states around them.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, you had said that when Colorado legalized, there just was not the law enforcement to keep up. And I thought that was an interesting perspective because, yeah, how do you do that? That just doesn't seem realistic for law enforcement to be able to enforce any kind of regulations, not at a mass level like that. I mean, that's just another clear, I don't know, for me, flashing red light of like, this is why it's dangerous and not a good idea, you know?
Right. And they're barely doing it here in Colorado. And to know that the citizens tax money, you're going to have to pay a lot of taxes to try to regulate this industry. So you're going to have to grow your government, pay a ton of taxes. You're going to have to get red flag laws in, because you're going to have so many more mentally ill people having access to firearms, dangerous firearms. And not even to get into that topic, but I can say anybody on whatever side of the issue do not want mentally unstable people having access to powerful firearms. So Indiana needs to think about that. Do you want to pay more in taxes? Do you really want to accommodate and legitimize another drug industry that you're going to have to pay for, not only with the health and safety of your people and impaired driving on the roads, like you learned from Corrine, who lost her daughter. I mean, her daughter was a completely innocent victim in this issue. And, it's just going to grow your government and pay a lot of taxes. And you're going to have more violence, more mental illness. Increased drugs equal increased drug harm expansion. So that's what these policies are. You can have there's like three major drug policies you can have. You can have prevention, you can have promotion, and you can have recovery drug policies. The only two drug policies any state, any community should be focusing on is drug prevention and drug recovery policies. And the best drug prevention, hands down, even over education, is do not legalize marijuana.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I just want to, well, I already said thank you, but thank you again, because I just think it's such a great topic to have discussed, and it can be hard to find people who really know like the science behind it and have educated themselves and share, valuable information. And so I appreciate that you are open to doing that and that you've joined us today. And Caitlin, I saw you unmute, so I don't know if you want to add anything.
I just wanted to say thank you for your time and educating us. I've really learned a lot more from speaking with you. So we thank you.
Oh, thank you, Carly. Thank you, Caitlin, for having me on. I appreciate you giving me a voice, and let me know if there's anything else I can do to help.